What are the Jets going to do this offseason? Who are they going to target in free agency? Where are they going in the draft? My first guest today is none other than Antwan Staley of the New York Daily News. We're going to talk all things Jets today in this hour of Football with Faria.
It's time for Football with Faria.
You got to get the offense right, and you got to be able to be aggressive. They put up 14 against the secondary. That is driving me up a freaking wall right now.
Now here's your host, Nick Faria.
All right, welcome again inside Football with Faria. I am your host, Nick Faria, of course. And today we have a very special guest on this Friday morning to discuss all things Jets. Yesterday we looked at the film and saw what was going right, what was going wrong early in the season. And now we get to talk about what happened at the end of the year and what's going to happen in 2024. And for my guest today is none other than New York Daily News Jets beat reporter Antwan Staley. Antwan, thanks for coming on.
Hey, good to be with you.
So let's talk about it. Obviously, I've been with you guys pretty much all year. You're one of my favorite people to talk to on the Jets beat. So when I was thinking about guests to have on early on when the show started, you were at the top of the list. For this Jets season and for all the failed expectations that they were unable to reach, going 7-10 for a second consecutive year, injuries played a part, obviously. But when you look at what the decision-making process was at the end of the year to keep Robert Saleh, to keep a lot of this offensive staff, what were your initial reactions to that? And if you could, what have you been hearing in terms of what changes could be made this offseason?
I mean, as far as the coaching staff, I wasn't really surprised. I mean, once Aaron went down, it was kind of like they were going to get a mulligan anyway, no matter what happened, unless things just kind of completely, fell apart. If they finished like 1-16 or something like that, then maybe it might be a different conversation. But, it was kind of the similar season as last year where, you had a team that struggled offensively, was great defensively and special teams, and that's what kept them in games. The only difference was between this season and last season was the Jets actually had a chance to. You felt like they had a chance to make the playoffs in 2022, where they were 7-4 coming down the stretch and seeing like, okay, they should get into the playoffs, and then everything just kind of collapsed after that. This year was just kind of, they just wasn't good enough the entire year, and obviously having Zach Wilson back there and certainly didn't help matters, depending on how you feel about him. But it's when I heard about the coaching staff remaining how it is intact, I was like, yeah, I mean, it kind of made sense in a way because you want to see how things are with Aaron. With a full coaching staff and also with a full season too. So I'm not necessarily surprised. I think what the surprising thing, at least so far, especially when you've seen some of the things on social media, the backlash on maybe Keith Carter and some of the other things that was going on behind the scenes. And also, you look at the offensive line and that struggle as a whole too. I mean, you had 13 different offensive line combinations in 17 games. I mean, it's hard to win that way. I mean, I thought last year was bad when they had 11 different players starting the offensive line. This was even worse, when John Benton was who was the offensive line coach last year. So as far as changes, I was a little surprised Keith Carter stayed, or at least right now it seems like that's going to be the case. But as far as changes that may come, it seems like it may not come from the coaching staff. It seems like they're going to go all in for 2024 and then just see, they can improve the roster moving forward.
Again, here with Antwan Staley, Jets beat reporter for the New York Daily News. Fans watching, if you have a question for Antwan, feel free to ask one in the chat. If you guys want to call in, absolutely. All the links are available on YouTube. Just comment as well for any questions. But Antwan, you mentioned Keith Carter, and throughout the season, I was kind of the banging on the drum of it's hard to judge an offensive line coach when you have this many injuries. But when you look at the tape, particularly late in the year, guys like Mekhi Becton, guys like Laken Tomlinson, these guys are veterans that were expected to start this year. For Mekhi, it may have been at a different position, but he was still the left tackle, still right tackle. He was still a starter. the fact that they weren't able to consistently produce at a high level on the left side, I think that's where a lot of the fans' frustration comes from. So in that instance, yes, the injuries defend, give Keith Carter a defense, if you will. But what's the argument in place for Carter to return, even when you have some starters that didn't look good at the end of the year?
Probably maybe the offensive lineman that you chose, which is
Mhm.
above his pay grade. Obviously, that would be a Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh decision. The guys that was there. I mean, I think that's part of it too. I mean, it just wasn't good enough. Some of the guys. I mean, Makai, I thought he looked good at times, especially early on. I thought he
I
played
agree.
much better, and then later on in the season, I think once he suffered that injury, he definitely wasn't the same player that he was. And then he not only was the injury, he also struggled with penalties and being undisciplined at times. But I thought early on, at least the first month and a half, like he was a much different player than what he was. But they got to do a better job just picking the offensive linemen. It's not just the starters either. I mean, we've seen it throughout the course, not even just with the Jets. We saw it with the Dolphins. We saw it with the Cleveland Browns. But the Browns, they lost, both tackles, and then they were still able to be a playoff team. There's something to be said about having depth and finding that depth and being able to use, because injuries are going to happen throughout the course of the season. So you got to be able to not only have, 5 starters that can, be successful and also be solid on your line and also protect your 40-year-old quarterback. You also got to have quality depth too, because injuries are going to happen. And that's something that I don't think the Jets had throughout, like whether you talk about the starting position, when it goes
Mhm.
back to, you relied on a 38-year-old Dwayne Brown to be your left tackle when you have a 39-year-old quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if that's necessarily the recipe for success. And it's like I say, Mekhi Becton did play early on, but still, we're talking about a guy that was coming off 2 knee injuries back to back too. So you're relying on guys that had health issues coming on. So I don't know if that's necessarily was the smart move either. But again, I think that goes back to Joe Douglas, and they need to do a better job picking these guys and also acquiring more depth. And they got a lot of work to do in that area this offseason in a couple of months.
I think, especially in training camp, that depth was definitely tested. I mean, we had spoken about it ad nauseum, where because Dwayne Brown was coming off the PUP list, because Mekhi Becton was still not 100%, you had AVT getting hurt, you had McGovern getting hurt a little bit of time. Some of that depth was tested. You had, Max Mitchell, Billy Turner, Wes Schweitzer, Tippmann was getting a lot of reps. So I think the one question I would have for you, and sort of based on my opinion, is I feel like the depth was addressed this past offseason, but it's hard to address depth when you're on your 13th different offensive line from an executive standpoint. You can't really prepare for, a completely different offensive line group, which is 10 of them, a completely different group to just be shunted to the side due to injuries. And then, of course, they brought in Roger Saffold, and then we never saw him again. It was essentially sat on the practice squad the entire time. So I get that. But with Joe Douglas, what depth are you looking for in particular to sort of solve this offensive line problem?
I don't know who they made angry in terms of injuries, but man, they need to pray this offseason because clearly the last couple years have not worked out really well, and somebody is upset with the Jets in that regard as far as offensive line. But yeah, I mean they got they got dealt a bad hand 2 years in a row. I mean, I thought, like I said, I thought it'd get worse in 2022, and then it got worse in
Yeah.
2023, and I don't I don't think it could get worse in 2024. But then again, like I said, I said the same thing a year ago. So you just want guys that can stay healthy. I think that's the main thing. Like you want to try to find, obviously you're not going to get all younger guys, but you want to get, I don't think you want to get guys that have an injury history. I think West have had a little bit of an injury history, whether you go back, you look at his body of work in Washington and other places, you again, relying on 2 guys that had, substantial injuries coming off with Dwayne Brown with the shoulder. And then
Mhm.
obviously you talked about Makai. Uh, McGovern, I think, was just bad luck, and obviously you had Joe Tippin. And it was kind of a blessing and surprise because I thought Joe Tippin, played well. You
I
look
did.
at the entire the season is a totality. And then Lincoln Tomlinson was kind of up and down, but one thing will give Lincoln credit for, he was the Iron Man. He was the only one. He was the last man standing. Out of all of them. I mean, he played all 17 games, whether
Yeah.
you like his game or not. Well, he was available, and that's something to be said about availability. So you can't predict injuries and things like that, but they're gonna have to try because again, you got an older quarterback. You cannot obviously this can't happen again. You have to try
Yeah.
to do everything in your power, whether keep Aaron healthy as much as possible. And although I'm sure we'll talk about the backup quarterback situation and
Oh
what
yeah.
that might look like too, but you also have to predict for that too, and that's something that's also a black mark. That they thought hey, Zach Wilson wouldn't play in 2023, and I thought they were very short sighted on that, simply because yeah, Aaron Rodgers has been healthy for the most part of his career, but he's also suffered injuries, from time to time too. And that's something you have to do a good job, if you're a general manager and also a coach, to try to predict those injuries. And, just in case something what's the worst case scenario? That's what you have to look at if you're the Jets this all season.
So it sounds like from the conversations, this early conversation, you would pin more of this season's failings on the front office more than the head coaching staff. Is that correct?
I think it's hand in hand, but yeah, I think I would say yes. Like I think it is the fact that they didn't address the backup quarterback situation. They didn't address, I think, some of the parts on the offensive line. You signed Alan Lazar to a deal that was just at the time I didn't understand it either. But although you're trying to appease Aaron Rodgers and everything like that. Although he wasn't technically a Jet yet, but you knew it was coming. Obviously
Mhm.
the Dalvin Cook thing didn't work out either. McCole Hardman. So yeah, I think it goes hand in hand. I think Saleh is also in fault for some things too. But I think choosing those, you're picking the groceries, you're choosing the players, and a lot of those players, especially free agency wise, did not work out. And then you look at the draft, I think Tippin worked out well, but it's still a question with Will McDonald. How would he be successful? What will he look like in a few years? Like
Mhm.
you hope that he can take the Jermaine Johnson route, where didn't have necessarily a standout year. Really didn't do much of anything his rookie year, but take that leap and become a solid player his sophomore year.
The thing that I looked at, and I do agree with you, where I tend to push the blame a little bit more on the front office side, and I look at the Corey Davis retirement as probably the best example because
That's huge.
the one issue that I always had was their passiveness. Douglas comes from the Howie Roseman tree of staying aggressive no matter what. If something were to happen, you go out and you go get another player. Philadelphia had a bad secondary this year. They tried to solve that with Bradley Roby and Kevin Byard. It didn't work out, but they were swinging. They were going to be
Correct.
aggressive. And when Corey Davis retired, we were wondering, we're sitting there, we're waiting. We were all surprised by it. We were wondering what was going to happen at the receiving position. And it was essentially, no, we're going to trust the undrafted guys. We're going to trust Lazard and Cobb and McCole Hardman. And we never saw McCole Hardman on the field enough to really gauge that. So to me, yes, coaching has a big part of it. I think the strength and conditioning staff has a part of it because of the injuries, the consistent injuries that we have seen the last couple of years. But I look at the passiveness and the overall just unwillingness, if you will, to just make a move for backup quarterback when Rodgers went down, for a receiver when Corey Davis went down. I think that was the true key to why the Jets particularly failed this year more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talked about the Corey Davis retirement. Yeah, I mean, he would have been their second best receiver, bar none, especially
Yeah.
considering how the season ended up winding out. But yeah, I mean, the rely on just I mean Brownlee and Gibson were making plays in training camp, but it's one thing to go from training camp as rookies making those plays to now you're on the big lights and the big stage, and now you're trying to do it for 17 games in a
Yeah.
season. And yeah, I mean it's hard to rely on those young guys to do it. Although I mean I like some of their potential, but we'll see if they can also take that lead too. But yeah, I mean I think you kind of hit it right there. I think I just don't think they've been aggressive enough. And yeah, I mean, you bring in, Trevor Siemian, which essentially it seemed like they weren't going to do anything. And then Zach Wilson has that poor game against the Patriots the first time around. And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, we'll sign, Trevor Siemian, maybe just to, hush up the naysayers and
Yeah.
everything like that. And then they put him on the practice squad. And then also, not for nothing, I mean, Tim Boyle, who like even in training camp, I think, I can't speak for you, but I can speak for myself and saying that I didn't think he was, a viable option. And I was like, why if you can't just have players on the roster just because, they had a history of Aaron Rodgers or they might have known the system. Like, okay, you can put him on the practice squad, but to put him on a main roster as your third quarterback just in case something would have happened. And obviously something happened, 4 plays into the season, and now all of a sudden he goes from, your third string quarterback to your backup quarterback. And then obviously Zach struggles. And then now he's your starter for a few weeks. And then that was obviously a disaster too. Like you have to go into the offseason with a plan that if you're going to use a roster spot on somebody, no matter what position it is, they potentially play, like period, bar none. You
Yeah.
can't just say, "Oh, okay, I have a red shirt year" like you did with Zach, because you never know. If injuries, the last 2 years have taught the Jets anything, or should have taught them anything, anybody can play at any given time. You are one injury away for playing, no matter what position it is, whether it be the offensive line, whether it be the quarterback, whether it be cornerbacks. As we saw, like Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed were out at the same game against the Eagles. They both were out, and they still found a way to win, which I thought was crazy in itself. But still, you
Blew
have
my
to
mind.
have a plan. You have to have a plan that every roster spot it could potentially play at some point. This is not the year to say, "Oh, okay, we're just going to use it." If this is Robert Saleh's first year, okay, fine, you can, redshirt a player or whatever. Like this is a situation where you have to win. You cannot get off to a slow start in 2024. People are already upset anyway. Some people want Saleh fired anyway. I'm not saying I'm one of those people, but you get off to a slow start next year, heads are going to roll. People are going to be upset. They expect results. And also, they should too. I mean, you look at a team like the Cleveland Browns. I mean, I know they got their butts kicked against the Texans, wild card round, but they still found a way with starting 5 different quarterbacks to make the playoffs. So it is no excuse. It's other teams in the league have also had injuries. The Dolphins had a ton of offensive line injuries. Although they slumped down the stretch, they still found a way to get into the playoffs. So all this stuff about how, you had all these injuries or like stuff like that, it's just a crutch. It's just an excuse. Like you have to have results. This is a results-based business. I don't know how many coaches have lasted, were able to draft the quarterback or also a GM to draft the quarterback. They failed on that quarterback and also got a 4th year too in the process. So this is rare company, but they have to win. And if they don't, then I think everybody's going to be held accountable.
I agree with that. I think this is it for Robert Saleh, for Joe Douglas, for pretty much this entire era of Jets football. You have to be able to get to the playoffs at least, the bare minimum. Again, we're talking with Antwan Staley of the New York Daily News with Football with Faria. Antwan, we talked a lot about this season already. There wasn't a playoff mandate. Woody Johnson was adamant last year when they brought in Aaron Rodgers that there wasn't a playoff mandate for 2023. And we kind of saw the reason why this year. In 2024, it clearly seems like this mandate has been made. Everyone knows. Rodgers even said it on Pat McAfee that essentially everyone's, feet are in the fire right now. They have to make the playoffs. They have to produce. So for this offseason, and we're going to try to take a lot of different topics regarding this offseason, but for the backup quarterback role, they're obviously going to address it. But who are they going to address it with? My name, the name that I always thought that made a lot of sense was Ryan Tannehill, because I thought his connection with Todd Downing made a lot of sense. There's obviously going to be guys that could come cheaper, but still a quality backup quarterback. Who do you see as a guy that the Jets should target, or someone that maybe no one's really talking about?
I think Ryan Tannehill is definitely probably the best out of the options. Obviously, he's somebody that can start just in case something were to happen in there. And then obviously you alluded to, you had some familiarity with Todd Downing. Heck, I remember I covered the Dolphins, so I remember Ryan Tannehill very well. So, that would be kind of a blast of the past for me. But, I think, a guy like a Jameis Winston, whoever, like, I think obviously, I don't know if people would be happy about that, but it certainly would be an upgrade compared to what they had the last couple of years. I'll say that. But, I think you talked about cheap or whatever. Like you can't go in this cheap. Like you have to look. Our butts are on the line. Like we have to be able to make the playoffs. So what is it going to take to get a guy like Ryan Tannehill or a Gardner Minshew just the case like he can't find a starting job. He might be able to somewhere potentially, but if he can't, then let's bring him in. I know they liked him before. They told some people off the record, some people in the organization, like they do like Gardner Minshew, but I think that's an option too. I think, obviously he showed he can win some games with the Colts there and get them at least close to position and contending for the playoffs. Again, that's another team that, lost this young starting quarterback in Anthony Richardson. You had a guy like a Gardner Minshew who had experience and also was able to keep them afloat up until the very end. So you have to have guys like that. Just to you going into the season with a 40-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles injury. I don't know how Aaron's going to play. I don't think any of us know. I don't think Aaron knows exactly how he's going to be able to hold up at this point. But I mean, you hope he can. But if just in case he can't, you got it. Again, it goes back to my point. What I said in the last segment. You got to be able to have every roster spot has to have a purpose, and then the backup quarterback position is also another one of those. And I think even the third string too, if you want to get a younger guy in the draft too, maybe to try to groom. But like, with the Jets, the way they been bit by bit by bad luck. You just young backup quarterback could end up. I mean, this quarterback could be a backup quarterback at some point. So you also want to be judicious of potentially who you may take. Maybe in the fourth round, where I could see them maybe taking a developmental guy as well.
I look at Jordan Travis and I circle him because I love what I saw in college. He's obviously got the knee injury. No one knows how he's going to respond. You're probably not going to get a lot of workouts out of him. And it's more of just the project, the idea of what he could become in the modern offense. And I know Cam Ward's a guy that a lot of people like. Antwan, I think you were one that's on the Cam Ward trade. But I love what I saw from Travis this year. That makes so much sense for the backup quarterback.
Yeah, I would have taken Cam. Yeah, I would have taken Cam Ward had he decided not to go to Miami, but which I understand that too because he can improve his draft stock too, and also become at the very least, I think a day 2 pick next year, especially if he has a good year with the Canes.
So, from one backup quarterback, obviously we're looking at the potential, but what happens with their current backup in Zach Wilson? I think everyone understands that Wilson's going to be gone this year, this offseason, whether it be by trade, whether it be by release. Do you see a team picking him up for substantial draft capital? Because an argument and a debate that a lot of people are having is what the Jets could get for a player like Zach Wilson, who had some good games this year. He looked competent at times, but then also was just completely bombarded by inefficient play, by turnovers at the wrong time, just not being able to read defenses at the right point. What are you seeing from the Zach Wilson sort of saga? I'm sure you think that this is the end for him, but where do you think he could end up?
Yeah, we all know it's over. Like I thought, potentially last year might have been over, but Aaron was able to save him because him and Aaron have a good relationship. I think Aaron has also kind of talked about that his one of the last few times on Pat McAfee that maybe a change of scenery is needed. So yeah, I definitely think it's potentially it's like I say, it's just a matter of time. They have to make a decision on his 5th year option. Obviously, they're going to decline that. It's worth $23 million. There's no way you pick that up, and then nobody would trade for that anyway. So in that case, once you decline it, then I think you'll get potential suitors. As far as trade capital, I mean, you can't imagine it could be anything more than I would. Me personally, I wouldn't give up anything more than a 6. For a guy like that, because they have to get rid of him. They're not going to keep him. So why would I give them anything above some substantial for Zach Wilson when I know especially with the rumors and stuff like that about his hesitancy, about playing or not playing, whether you believe that or not. No matter what the case is, I think it's best for both parties to kind of move on, especially considering this is a we're going into another critical year for the Jets, and obviously they need another, experienced backup quarterback. And then he deserves a second chance somewhere else where he doesn't have that expectation. I'm not saying he's going to be like Baker Mayfield, where he does take off and do a good job with what Baker is doing with Tampa. But what I will say is, like, when you don't have those expectations, now he's just a player going
Mhm.
to another place where he doesn't have he's not the overall two overall pick anymore, even though
Yeah,
he was. But there, he's just a guy trying to make a
he's the
roster.
backup. Yeah.
So exactly. So I definitely think that would be beneficial to him. Where you know maybe you talk about the Rams or somewhere like that. I think that might be a possibility. Um, maybe Arizona, somewhere like that, somewhere just he could just get away where it's not a lot of bright lights, where he could just get away and just play ball. And we saw
Mhm.
like he did still show some flashes. Whether you talk about the Texans game, but I thought was probably the best game he's ever played, or the Chiefs game. Ended
Chiefs
up
game was
losing that
great.
one, but I actually thought he did a good job there, minus the fumble, which he also was accountable for too. Zach has grown up a lot, and it just hasn't always translated on the field. But yeah, I think a fresh start somewhere else would be beneficial.
I think everyone here, Jets fans, the reporters, the media, you got Zach Wilson himself. I think everyone just wants a clean slate from this. And it's very clear that Zach wants out. I think that was obvious. And I think the fans just don't want to see it again. And that's why the backup quarterback is going to be so important this year, because as good as he looked at times, you mentioned the Chiefs game, the Texans game. I thought he looked pretty solid against Philadelphia as well. Granted, they only put up, 20 points, but he didn't turn the ball over, and the turnover battle was 5-0. When you do that, when you're not turning the ball over and the other team is, you just got to do enough to win. And I was one of the people that was saying that this team could still make the playoffs if they had competent quarterback play. And I can't say that that was the case for the entire season. It was just too up and down, just too much of a roller coaster to survive. But when you look at the quarterback, you look at the offensive line, really those are the two main focal points going into this season and going into this offseason. But if there's a position that you feel Jet fans aren't really looking into that they need to address, what position do you think that would be to this point?
I would throw wide receiver in there too. I mean, I think
Mhm.
having another guy opposite Garrett is a must, because the problem with, like, especially late down the season, and I'm sure you saw this, like,
Yeah.
they and then Hackett. Well, I'll talk about him in a minute, but um, they relied a lot on Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson to kind of move the passing game, because that's really all they had at times. Because a lot of people were, even at times people were keying in on Garrett, and then he was getting frustrated and things like that too. But one thing I would say about Hackett too, they thought they should have relied more on Brees Hall in the passing game a little bit sooner. It seemed like they waited really towards the end. I think starting maybe towards the Commanders game a little bit. Maybe,
Mhm.
they did a little bit with the Texans too, but Hackett even said it himself, like, I didn't know Brees Hall could catch that, be a factor in the passing game, which I was like, I just kind of on the film, you can go see it, whether it
We
be in
we saw it in
college or
practice. How many times in
yeah.
training camp did we see Brees Hall get utilized in the passing attack? And I think what Hackett and Saleh really defended themselves on was, well, we had to change the offense when Aaron went down. So we were just trying to go more traditional, keep it basic. And then when they realized they were eliminated, it was, all right, well, let's just show everyone what we can do with the kind of offense that we're going to run with Aaron.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know why they didn't do that to begin with, or again, rely on your playmakers. That's what I feel like they tried to do a little bit more. And outside of the Browns game, I feel like they were kind of successful once they got eliminated. But I think as far as other than wide receiver, I think you look at potentially they could possibly add another tight end. I don't think CJ is probably on the way out. I think he might be a cap casualty. Although Tyler, I think Tyler Conklin had a good year.
Yeah.
I don't know what you have in Jeremy Ruckert as of yet. So Bowers has been a guy that some people have talked about too. If he's available, at 10, and then some of the tackles are gone, then that might be a position that they take. You look at defensive side of the ball too. I mean, I think defensive tackle might be a situation outside of, I think Quentin Jefferson did a good job, but he'll be a free agent. So you hope that you can bring him back. But I think they need a run stopping guy, because at times, although I think it got better as the season went on, they had the inability to stop the run at times. It seemed like sometimes either they could stop the run really well or they couldn't.
Mhm.
It wasn't like in the middle. Like either the run defense was really good or it's really bad. So I definitely think that's an option too. And then you look at safety. Jordan Whitehead. Yeah, I mean, he's had some productive games, especially particularly against the Bills, crazy
Oh yeah.
enough, where he had the 3 interceptions week one, and then he ended up picking up Josh Allen, late in the game in November. But outside of that, it was kind of like, but I definitely think, that might be another position that you look at too, that throughout the course of the draft.
I love that you brought up defensive tackle because that was the one spot that I felt no one was really talking about because obviously when you have an all pro like Quinn Williams, everything just becomes easier along the defensive line. And we looked at the tape yesterday, Jet fans, and we saw how many double teams that Quinnen was facing just in week one alone. And it allowed players like Quinn Jefferson, players like Solomon Thomas to have really good years. So I feel that I do agree that defensive tackle is a quiet need. And of course, wide receiver. And we're going to get to some of those targets in a little bit. But when you look at the draft, you mentioned Brock Bowers. And a lot of Jets fans, I'm going to show you one comment here from VR Diesel. No Bowers for the Jets. He is a want, not a need. I know a lot of people are against the Brock Bowers train because everyone is focusing on Joe Alt, Olu Fashanu, Latham. There's a lot of different. This is a deep tackle class. With the Jets at 10, and because you brought Bowers up, I was going to talk about this later, but I wanted to get your opinion here. But the Jets at 10, let's say one of those guys fall. And based on draft report, based on the latest mock drafts from a lot of different guys, there's an opportunity, there's a chance one of them could. Not saying it will, but there's a chance one of them could. If that's the case, Bowers can't be considered, right? It has to be Fashanu or
No,
Alt.
no. Yes, yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, you run to the podium if one of those guys on the board. But I'm just saying, if they're neither one is on the board, you have to consider it, or you could try to trade down. But again, when people say, "Well, let's trade down," but
Mhm.
one, it has to be worth your while to do that, and you're not just going to trade down just to trade down. Like you're going to trade to acquire more picks, whether potentially you could draft, they could get a second round pick. If you were able to do that, then yeah, I would trade down. But it has to be worth your while in order to do that. And your player that you want, or you're still kind of falling in love with, also has to be there. If it's not, then you take the best available player. I understand that Bob Bowers is not necessarily a need, but he's a player. Like you can't tell me he wouldn't have been a factor on this offense
Oh,
last year,
good
especially
God.
considering the state that it was, and they were one of the worst offenses in football. So yeah, I definitely think yeah, you don't. I wouldn't take him if one of the tackles are there, but if he's there and then they're both off the board, then you have to definitely consider it.
Conversation definitely gets brought up. Again, Football with Faria. We're here with Antwan Staley of the New York Daily News. He's the Jets beat reporter for NYDN. Antwan, in terms of free agency, we're going to go back to free agency. And the one thing that everyone expects, Robert Saleh said it, Joe Douglas said it, Aaron Rodgers said it, is that they're going after a receiver. I looked at T. Higgins as sort of the top guy. The Jets are going to have to make some cap space, create some cap space in order for that to happen. There's obviously a lot of different guys that they could target: Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Michael Pittman. Who do you see as a viable option for the Jets in free agency at receiver?
Well, yeah, as you could alluded to, yeah, they don't have a lot of cap space at all. So I think that with a lot of coded to over the cap, they're gonna if they do like the maximum type of restructures, then they can get up to about $70 million. Obviously, they probably won't do the maximum restructures. So
Mm.
so I probably expect them to have probably about 45-50 million dollars of cap space once they do restructure some deals too,
Still a
which I
lot,
think
though.
is still a good amount of money to sign some players and improve the offensive line, potentially get a wide receiver there. Yeah, T. Higgins is available. I think they might potentially look to sign him, but I don't know if they're going to try to break the bank for him. The thing is, somebody else might want to pay him a little bit more, and he might decide to go there. If that's the case there, then I think you can find, like you say, you talked about Pittman. Obviously, I know they're going to try to make a call for Devontae Adams once again. I don't know. It depends on what happens with the Raiders. It seems like they're going to keep Antonio Pierce, which I
Yeah.
think in that case, I think Devontae's going to want to stay. I think he
Agreed.
wanted to go out there, to the West Coast anyway, to get closer to family and things like that. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't see that happening. So you pivot from that. Mike Evans will be a free agent there. I think he might stay in Tampa, especially now, considering how good the team has been. And then
Yeah.
now they're in the, NFC divisional round. And then he's been there forever. I mean, the man's a future Hall of Famer, and then he's still putting up big numbers there. And, did it with Baker Mayfield this year. So I think, he might stay, but then again, I might try to, persuade him too, because to have that veteran presence, alongside Garrett, who's going into his third year, I think that would be, possibly another option too. I thought that might have been, a potential trade, a move. It could have made it the trade deadline, but again, Tampa was still in the, playoff hunt too. So I don't think they were looking to move Evans at that time. But yeah, I definitely think those are guys that I would definitely look towards that they're going to make. Definitely with Adams, I think that's probably going to be the first call to the Raiders and try to persuade him to, ask for a trade. But I don't think that's going to happen.
So with receiver though, and you mentioned Adams, I do agree that if Pierce is the head coach, there's no way he's going to want to leave. And I know the franchise tag is going to at least dwindle some of these top guys, whether it be Pittman, whether it be Mike Evans. One comment here from Diesel, one question is, what about Tyler Boyd as a number 2 option? And, with T. Higgins getting number 1 receiver money, and I think you and I both agree he's going to get number 1 receiver money. Is this a viable option? Is there a guy out there that we're not thinking of that would fit what the Jets want to do as a receiver, just to get a number 2 or number 3 option instead of getting a 1A to Garrett Wilson's 1B?
I mean, it's also the draft too. I do like Tyler Boyd. I think he's like sneaky, very underrated. I think he's just been overshadowed, obviously, by Chase and obviously Higgins there. But it was a time where he was their, top option or their number 2 option too, as well. And then they kept drafting receivers, and then he kind of got lost in the shuffle of their offense. But I mean, again, he would have been a much upgrade to the Jets offense last year. So yeah, I definitely think that's definitely an option too. I mean, the draft is also a potential
Yeah.
option too. I mean, you have some studs at wide receiver. It's a deep wide receiver draft. It's a deep tackle draft. Obviously, everybody talks about Rome from Washington. I think he's an option there. I spoke to you about Malik Neighbors. I think he's
Yeah.
obviously also a guy that they could potentially look at too. So those are also options that could be on the boards too for the Jets as well. They're younger guys. Yeah, it may take them a little bit while to develop, but again, I think both of them would have been a complete upgrade from what they had a year ago, where you just had Garrett and had a lot of guys that were inconsistent and still trying to find their way. And yeah, you had some younger guys, and obviously Gibson and Brownlee, but those are undrafted guys. So I don't know how much you could rely on them, especially in the first year, to be able to produce on a consistent basis.
Again, like we said, we know they're going to attack the receiver spot. Aaron Rodgers said as much on Pat McAfee. But speaking of Rodgers, because you and I have had to write about him whenever he goes on that show every Tuesday. He's not going to be on anymore. Are you happy at the fact that you no longer have to watch the McAfee show every Tuesday?
I mean, yeah, basically. But I would what we would do, I would write about it some weeks depending on what he would say. I mean, but everybody was still watching it just to see what he had to say, and then see if it was pertinent. But yeah, I think after his last appearance, not the one that he came on surprisingly, but the one before that, I think it's probably good for everybody to just kind of get away for a little while, and then have him back. Maybe the start of free agency, he'll probably be back. But yeah, everybody needs a break after that situation. Put it that
You
way.
get your chance to have your break. What was it? You said what was it? You're going to take a 2-week break off after the season ended? It was something like that after the Joe Douglas spoke.
Well, I think everybody needs like some time off, because that was just it was it was just one of those. It was rough. It was a difficult season. Like for me, it was like one of the most trying seasons I've ever covered football, from a standpoint where a lot happened, and it wasn't just because of the Aaron injury. It was just a lot going on. Just put it that way. And it felt like after the season ended, it was just completely drained. Like, because you go from week 1 to high expectations, and then 4 plays in, and it's like oh crap, it's back to basically what they had last year, where they had a good defense, and then Zach Wilson, and they struggled, offense
Mhm.
and everything like that, and then they were never in it. At least in 2022, they were in it. Like they had a
Yeah.
chance. They literally legitimately had a chance to make the playoffs, and then everything just kind of crumbled. Late this year, it just felt like a continuation of that in a way where the offense continued to struggle. It seemed like they had an opportunity, but they just could never, get past that hump. It seemed like after the Eagles game, after the bye week, and that's what kind of happened last year in 2022 too. After the bye week, everything just kind of went down.
I Again, this is my first year on the beat, so experiencing that. But I think it was by like week 5, I sat there and I'm like, "Holy Jesus, what is going on?" It seems like everything is just off the rails at every given moment. And you obviously have been doing this a lot longer than I have, so the fact that you guys needed a break, I completely understood it. There are reasons why I was bored out of my mind at the end of the year, and you guys were like, "Nope, we're good. Take the break. We're good. Everything's okay. Everything's fine."
Yeah, once they get eliminated, then you're like, yeah, at that point, you're like, well, it's over. Like you just, even though it was still 3 more games left to play, but it was still like, yeah,
Get to the
you just know
finish
you
line.
needed a break at that point. Exactly. After the Dolphins,
Get to the finish line.
after they lost 30-0 to the Dolphins, yeah.
The thing that I always found interesting, and particularly with this offensive line, is some of the answers that they're going to have and solve. We you talked about there's an ability for the Jets to free up close to $70 million in cap space. The expectation is probably they'll open up close to 50. But some of those restructures are going to come like from Lake and Tomlinson, CJ Mosley, some of those veterans as well that have high cap hits. But one player that's going to have his future decided is Mekhi Becton. We kind of alluded to him earlier, how he started out pretty surprisingly. He started out well and sort of fell off at the end of the year once he had those injuries. Where do you see him going? Because I know a lot of people are kind of Switzerland on this. Some of them see he could come back. I've been on the train saying that the Jets should bring him back on a 1-year prove-it deal. Where do you see him going this free agency?
I think he's gonna be gone. I don't know where, but I think it's probably
Mhm.
best. Like, remember Solid? He was taken before Solid even got there, so I definitely think that might play a role too. Although he was a Joe Douglas pick, but the sense that I got, especially considering how things have kind of unraveled late in the season,
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, again, he might be another player that might benefit from going somewhere different because I mean, the man took a lot of criticism, some of it unwarranted,
yeah.
considering his injury. I mean, he had some freak injuries. So, and yeah, he might have had, some bad, decision makers, bad advice in his ear, about especially particularly, the first knee injury, which he probably should have, gotten a better surgery on it. He obviously admitted it towards that. But yeah, I definitely think he's another guy that I definitely think could benefit from a change of scenery there. I think he can be a decent player, a good player. I mean, you look at, a guy like George Fant, he
Yeah.
ended up leaving the Jets and then, became a cog, a serious cog on that Texans offensive line. So I definitely think kind of a similar type thing could happen to Makai, where I'm not saying he's going to be a Pro Bowl player, but I definitely think he could be a starter somewhere else, or at the very least, a backup guy that could plug and play, if injury were to happen to another team on another team. But yeah, I definitely think he's gone. Like I could just sense it like late towards the season that I think he would invite a change of scenery. I think the Jets would probably also invite a change of scenery in regards to Becton.
Is it Mackay driving this, or is it the team driving this? Because it seems like from talking to Rich, talking to you, that this is more of just a mutual thing of, hey, let's just go our separate ways. But they need a swing tackle. They need a guy that can come
Yeah.
in and back up, whether it be right tackle or even start a right tackle, and to replace 2 tackle positions instead of just one. I think that would be at least a little harder to do overall. No.
Well, yeah, it would be. They have the option as far as starting. Like they could move AVT to right tackle, and then also have try to find a guard too. Either way, you're gonna have to find 2 starters on the line at least
Yeah.
this year, assuming you bring back Lincoln Tomlinson, but I think he'll be a restructure. You have Tip in there, and then you have AVT wherever he's going to play, wherever he's going to, whether it be guard or tackle. So that means, you have to find a left tackle or a right tackle or a right guard. So yeah, I mean, and then like you said, they're gonna have to find a guy that can also plug just in case injuries were to happen, because it
Yeah.
is the Jets, and we know history has been. So yeah, you also have to. It's kind of like a 6-man type of deal, like you see in basketball, where this guy's definitely going to come in and play. It's just a matter of like where he's going to play. So yeah, you definitely have to keep that in mind too. But yeah, I just think that I just get the sense that he wants to move on. I get the sense the Jets want to move on, and yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But it also creates another issue there, where you have to find at least another, start 2 starters and another backup that can play substantial snaps.
Let's get to some questions here for those comments for Antwan here on Football with Faria. First one from J Dubs. Would it serve the O-line better to cut Tomlinson and move Tipman and AV to guard position? So essentially bring back McGovern, move Tipman to left guard and AVT to right guard, I think is the question being asked here.
I don't know. I like Tipping at center. I don't
I
know
agree.
why. I mean, I don't know why. I get he played guard, and I think he did a good job there. I think center is his position moving forward, so I would not bother with that. I just want to keep him at one. The part of the problem I like with AVT too, and I think they've kind of addressed this. They've moved him from back and forth in different positions. They need to keep him in one position. I'm not saying that has anything to do with him getting hurt. It just could be again, freak injuries or a lot stroke of bad luck. But just keep him at one position. Keep him, whether it be guard, tackle, and do not move him whatsoever. And I don't know what that's going to be. We asked him at the end of the season. He said he's going to have to watch some film and try to figure out what's the best position for him. I would keep him. I would put him at right tackle, because I thought he did a really good job at tackle. Hey,
Mhm.
the man can play anywhere he wants to. He could probably play center if he wanted to. But I definitely think keeping him at tackle, I think you have that spot solidified, and then have Tippin at center. I think you can find a guard, whether it be
Yeah.
free agency or you want to go in the draft. You could potentially do that. Try to get a second round pick. Find a guard, second, third, whatever, and then obviously left tackle is going to be the prime need for the Jets in the offseason, whether it be you find them in the draft or also obviously free agency.
From VR Diesel again. What about some of our recent O-line draft picks? Max Mitchell in 2022, Carter Warren 2023. Are they going to be given a chance to start? But before you answer, Antoine, I know a lot of people weren't impressed with the tape with Carter Warren. I know the Jets were happy and surprised with what they saw from him. I liked what I saw, and I think he could be that swing tackle guy as well. What are your thoughts?
I think that's part of your depth. Like, I like these guys. I don't know if I want them to start necessarily,
Mhm.
but I like them as far as a depth piece too. Because again, injuries are going to happen on the offensive line. You need to know that if in case those guys that does happen, these guys could potentially play. I thought Warren got better and better considering the circumstance that he was in. That I mean, the man didn't play for like I don't know how many games, and then he come in and give them substantial snaps. I thought he did a serviceable job. But yeah, he's part of that depth where I think in Max Mitchell too as well. That when the injuries happen, you can just plug those guys in. And I think you could do they can give you a solid amount of snaps.
One funny little comment here from our good friend Gator. Trade Zach Wilson for a 6-month Netflix subscription. See if you can get the ad-free version. I think this is a perfect explanation, Antoine, of just the disdain that is had right now. And ultimately, I do want to bring this up because this comment's a perfect encapsulation of this. Did the Jets set Zach Wilson up to fail the minute he was drafted by starting him right away and getting that and
Yes.
just putting him in there?
Yeah, I think I don't have a problem with them starting him. I have a problem with them they just handed him the keys to begin with without actually earning it. Even if you look at, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and I know
Yeah.
Bryce struggled, this year, but at least the one thing the Panthers did do, I thought was smart. Then they brought in a veteran to at least give him some competition. They brought in Andy Dalton, and I think that might have helped him. And then if he beat out that veteran, that's great. If he doesn't, then maybe take a step back and let that veteran play for a little bit, and then play the guy that you drafted later on once he's able to show that he can be the starter and get those meaningful snaps too. CJ Stroud, kind of the same thing too. They didn't announce he was going to be the starter right away, and then eventually he won the job, and obviously the rest is history. He's gone on to have one of the best rookie seasons for a quarterback of all time. But yeah, I don't think it's something to be said for having these guys earn the starting job instead of just giving them the keys. I think they did him a disservice in doing that. They gotta earn it, man. You gotta earn it on the field, and from that moment on, I think everything was kind of going downhill for the Jets, and obviously Zach Wilson.
It seems public opinion switched on him very early in his rookie year, where even the small little solid games they had, whether it was Tennessee, Tampa, they just didn't see a good quarterback, and that public opinion was switching early. And I didn't feel the Jets did a good enough job of putting him in a position to succeed in an environment like this. It was, hey, here you are. We tried with Sam Darnold. Now you try with lesser talent and all these other issues. There was just so many other problems that this team had that just weren't addressed right away. It wasn't a good breeding ground for a young quarterback.
Yeah, I think, and Robert Saleh said, like, in the past, like, the talent just wasn't good when he got there. So
Yeah.
why would you put a rookie quarterback that you take number 2 overall in that position where you don't have good talent, and then that it's going to struggle? Like I think almost any quarterback would have struggled in that situation because you're coming off Adam Gase, and obviously that was a disaster there. You get there, you try to improve the talent, and they did over time. But that first year is going to be that's your mulligan year typically because it was just
Everyone
nothing
expected
there.
them to be bad. Yeah.
Exactly. It was just the the roster was completely bare at that point, and you're just trying to gain more talent on there. But yeah, I think I would have settled right away. I don't know if it would have made a difference. Maybe it would have, maybe it did not. But that team was just not good enough at all. And then obviously you come into a second year, and the meniscus happens in the preseason, and I think that also set him back too. We ended up missing the first 4 games of the year.
There are so many issues that come up with Zach Wilson. But next question, focusing around this draft and the offensive line. If you can't trade back from VR Diesel, you would do Bowers over the 3rd tackle like Fuaga, or even the 4th like Latham, asking for a friend. So essentially, Antwan, if these guys are available and there's still a deep tackle class, you still going Bowers?
I'm not a Lathan guy, although I think he's solid.
Gotcha.
But Fuega, yeah, I do like him. I love. I mentioned him like on Twitter too as a guy that I think he's the 3rd best tackle in the draft. Like I thought he did a great job at Oregon State there. I know a lot of people probably didn't see him. I mean, I watch a lot of Pac-12 football, so I was able to see him on a regular basis. I think he's up there with 2 of the best, obviously the 2, test tackles up there, all at Ola too. But yeah, I definitely think Fuaga is definitely a guy that I think he could come in and be a, potential franchise, tackle there for the Jets too. So yeah, I would, if he's there at 10, I would definitely take him, or at least consider taking him. But also, Bowers could be an option. Obviously, we talked about wide receivers too. You can get a good player at 10. Like it's just a matter of who you decide to take, and then just don't overthink. Just take whoever I think the best available player is at 10, and then you can figure everything out. But it can't be another Will McDonald situation where obviously that player does not contribute, throughout the course of their rookie year. Whoever your draft has to be able to play and has to be able to, get those starter snaps in 2024.
So what you're saying is if the best player available is a defensive lineman, you think they're jumping at him again?
No. At the available, like, let me rephrase that. Best available player at the position of need. I'll put it that way.
I'm pulling your chain there, Antwan. No, I appreciate
absolutely
I appreciate
not.
you coming on.
Although I do expect them to take a defensive end at some point, because I think Bryce Huff is probably on the way out.
So we kind of glossed it over because we've had so much to talk about in this hour. You think Huff is gone? There's no way that they're going to try to franchise him, try to move him for a draft pick. None of that. He's just walking in free agency.
Well, since that I've been told that they're not going to franchise, because that'd be like over $20 million for a guy that's as good as he is like for what they have is a situational pass rusher. Like he didn't start for, although he's tremendous at what he does. I think he's, you know, proven that he can, play, in the run game, and obviously, it's a sack monster. Have 10 sacks, and he wasn't even, a starter for the team. That's how good he is. But I definitely think they're going to rely on Will McDonald, and obviously, they're going to bring back JFM, and obviously, they have Jermaine Johnson, and hope that they can pick up some of the slack that they lost from Bryce Huff too, losing him in free agency. But yeah, I think he's gonna look for probably like and I wrote about this earlier this week, like a Montez Sweat type of deal. And then in that case, the Jets are not going to bring him back for that amount of money, especially
Yeah.
considering he's not a starter.
No, I appreciate it. Antwan, thank you so much for jumping on today. I know the fans out there love you having come on. Love to have you in the future as well as we get through free agency and the draft. But as always, I just want to also give a big thank you and a shout out because you were one of the first people that sort of brought me into the fold of the Jets beat, and I'm very appreciative of that. Hopefully, I'll be back next year in training camp. We'll see what happens there. But thank you so much for jumping on and being a great role model for this beat.
Well, I'm not like Rich has been on the beat for like 32, 33 years. I think Rich is like the elder statesman of the beat too, but I'm nowhere near that actually as far as age or whatever. I think he has me like over like 25 years or whatever.
You were
but,
there before
yeah.
me. That's all I'm saying. You were there before
Yeah.
me.
Oh yeah,
I
for
really
sure.
appreciate
But
it.
but yeah, anything I can do, man, I don't mind helping at all. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Antwan Staley of the New York Daily News. Thank you guys so much for jumping on Football with Faria. We're going to be off for this weekend, and we'll see you guys next week on Monday to discuss the divisional round and more about what happens with Philadelphia, what happens with the coaching searches that come on. This is Football with Faria. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you guys next week.